Sound is off.
Sounds off? Okay. Better? Okay. This summer, when the Kids Count rankings came out from the Annie Casey Foundation, Steve, you said, quote, "It's entirely unacceptable. Our kids deserve better, and our state's economy needs better." So how did it get so bad? Why was it tolerated for so long?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Ron, in terms of why it was tolerated for so long. I'm fairly new to the state, new into the superintendency role, joined the administration 2 years ago, and then as the state superintendent a year ago. But I can say, like, going forward, a number of actions have been taken, a number of investments have been made in order to appreciate the issue. We may be at the tail end of the massive growth that sort of belies some of those statistics. A state that's just trying to keep up and build schools, where now I think we can settle back into and focus on achievement and focus on and ensure our students have the opportunities that they deserve in the future and that they can claim those opportunities.
Yvanna, can I ask you the same question? Why do you think, why was it accepted for so long?
I don't think it should have been accepted for so long. And I think to say that it was accepted kind of...
Try there. There we go.
No?
I think so. Can you hear her now? I would say, why you say accepted is the wrong word.
Well,
because it was contested?
Well, I think that there were a lot of people who for a long time have been banging on the drum of this being wrong for kids, wrong for families, and unfortunately it was not loud enough to, I think, make the changes necessary. But I do believe that, I think that we are on the tail end of growth and that we're finally headed in a direction of really having a discussion so that it is not anywhere near accepted.
Brittany, you have a unique experience in many ways, but before I get to all elements of that, I want to just talk about maybe the most conventional part of your experience, which is that you teach English composition for first-year students at UNLV. Are your students college ready for the most part?
Part, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
And I think a lot of freshmen they do have to catch up to where we believe that they so there are a lot of sort of remedial courses offered to get students to where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. Michelle, you're kind of the other end of the pipeline. You are, as the Congresswoman said, I think she said the biggest employer in the state. Do you find the workers you need here?
First exception to Nevada, we have a low-skilled workforce because, as Brittany knows, it takes a lot of skills to work in hospitality, mostly relationship skills. And so I think our workforce is unique because of the number of hourly employees that we have. And a college degree isn't required for the vast majority of our roles. But I do think that our employees are skilled.
That's a really good point. It's low in educational attainment, right, but not necessarily low in skills. But looking at it from that perspective as well, do you find the workers you need? Do you?
I think the workforce is unique, and it's a unique city because of the concentration of all of the companies, and all of our competitors are on one street. Within 3.5 miles, MGM has 50,000 employees. There aren't very many, companies in the world that have that concentration. Every single one of our competitors are on the same street. So it's a tight-knit community. I think that having a third of our employees at work at any given time in a 24-hour period, 7 days a week, I think it makes it a unique environment.
Craig, same question. I have seen figures that at the students enrolling in the College of Southern Nevada, as much as 1/3 have needed remedial math or English. What's the trend line on that? Is it getting better? Is it still a challenge?
I think it's always a challenge, but it is definitely getting better. The CCSD is doing a good job at addressing the issues that we've had, I think, and from what we can tell, while there's still an issue there, it is definitely going in the right direction.
Yeah. Steve, let me ask you, because certainly, as I said, this project that we are here as part of Next America is kind of chronicling how the country is adapting to growing diversity in every aspect of our life. And certainly one of the milestones that America is living through now is that as of about 2 years ago, a majority of our public school students nationwide are kids of color. That's old news here. I mean, for your school system, it became majority kids of color in 2004 school year, and since then you have added 68,000 more students in just the last 12 years. 2/3 now of your students are kids of color, and Hispanics are by far the largest single group. You are still facing significant performance gaps. Despite gains, performance gaps on NAEP in particular. What have you learned here about dealing with a diversifying student body that may be relevant to states elsewhere that are now going through the same process some years down the road?
Yeah. The first thing I would say that I've learned is that all of our students are capable of achieving at high levels. And that diversity is an asset in many of our school settings, and in many, whether it be economic diversity in terms of poor and more of their affluent peers, or whether it's gender, or whether it's race or ethnicity. So I think I think diversity is a strength, and all of those students can achieve. I think what we've learned, though, at the same time, is that additional resources are necessary in many cases. And in 2013 and 2015, the state put additional resources towards students who are English language learners, recognizing, of course, that students who are unable to be fluent in the academic language of English, that they need additional supports and time. What we're seeing from that investment is that we're getting results, that students and the school system are supporting those students to acquire English, and that they're performing well. But I'll end where I started. All of those every student in Nevada can achieve at a high level and be competitive in Nevada, or be competitive across the nation or globe. It's up to us to raise our standards.
Yvanna, I think we talked, you told me the average age of your members, I think, was 52. So they are right in the prime age of having, school-age kids. And they are, I'm sure, overwhelmingly people who are relying on the public schools. Do they feel the needs of their children are being met by the public schools today?
It's actually an area that we have started to really have our members about. So we have about 57,000 members are Latino, about 130,000 families are health funds. So it gives you an idea of how many folks we represent. And typically don't have deep conversations about education policy, because that is not what we are experts on. However, over the last decade, the amount of parents who have come to us and said, we want the union to do more to fix the education system, and it's on issues that we actually can speak to, right? The fact that a parent works swing shift from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., so they don't get to go to parent-teacher conferences, or the fact that our folks come from over 160 countries, and sometimes there's no one in the school who speaks the parents' native language. And more we realize that our members are the best spokespeople for what needs to be here. And we're working on harnessing that data to be able to become increasingly involved in making changes that affect where they're at.
You mentioned, you have to keep facilities staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It does create a lot of challenges with schedules. How big a concern is that for your workers about kind of managing and supervising the education of their kids?
It's I think it's a big concern. And going back to your first question around how do we get where we are? My husband's a principal in the public school system, an elementary school principal, and I think our large percentage of our population who are shift workers, and the busiest shift in Las Vegas is the time that Yvanna mentioned, when traditional office workers are able to spend time with their children reading and doing homework. That's when the vast majority of people...
Is that the 2 to 10 shift?
The 2 to 10 shift, swing shift. That's when the vast majority of hospitality workers are at work. That's our busiest time in Las Vegas. And so when you have such a large percentage of the parents at work during that time frame, it makes it challenging for kids to, or for students to be able to spend time with their parents, to do their homework, to to learn kind of that discipline day to day. And that's what my husband would say is one of our biggest challenges is that many kids are under care of another family member or babysitter, but they're not with their parents during that time frame. And I think that's one thing that's unique about our city.
So Brittany, as you mentioned, you have a foot in two worlds. I mean, you teach English composition, and you also work as a service worker, and you write very eloquently about kind of navigating between these two worlds. How challenging is that world for parents in terms of engaging with their kids' education and helping to kind of put them in the right path?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly challenging. I worked as a cocktail server, and one thing the women talk about constantly is childcare. And these shifts do create challenges for women to be able to spend more time.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think that it creates a lot of challenges. I'm a cocktail server, so predominantly women are talking a lot about childcare, how to meet their childcare needs. Many of them are single mothers or balancing multiple part-time service work. And as a result, like has already been mentioned, those hours when it really is important, just as critical as what happens in the classroom is those times after the classroom. That report that you cited at the beginning talks about that sort of dual approach to education, not only improving the situation for students, but improving the situation for their parents,
right,
so they can be better educators in the home. So
See,
that is the most common conversation
Really?
that happens at the service well is, where are my children and what are they doing, I would say.
It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? I mean, this is a somewhat unique set of challenges for school. I mean, there may be no other city in the country where it is as acute, the issue that Michelle and Brittany and Yvanna have all talked about. So, Steve, what are answers that schools in the state are kind of, formulating to respond to the unique challenge of parents who may not be there in the hours when parents are usually there in other places?
So where we're seeing it be really successful, or where we see schools that are unpredictably, right, in a good way, achieving results for students, we see that they've changed their frame about what community or parent involvement looks like. So rather than the traditional, hey, we're going to invite you to a school night and have some pizza, it's very much a push out into the community and into the parent homes. It's knocks on doors, it's check-ins, it's trying to break down the barrier between some families, and quite frankly, the institution of education can at times be intimidating to a lot of families, especially families with low income or new in country.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of schools that are effective at doing this, engaging families where they are and providing tools, and then slowly bringing them in and empowering that community to come into the school over time.
I want to come back and talk in a few minutes in more detail about some of the educational reforms the state is pursuing, but let's talk a little bit about the adult population. As both Michelle and Craig have kind of alluded to, as I mentioned, only about 22% of the adults in the state have 4-year college degrees or more, which is at the lower end for states in the country. But obviously that doesn't mean they're necessarily low skilled, as you point out. So what is the key in your mind and in your experience, and because you guys actually work on this, about creating opportunity for people already in the workforce who have limited educational attainment? How do you provide a pathway for them to be better off a year from now than they are today?
Well, at MGM Resorts, I think we think that's a cornerstone, a foundational aspect of our company and our culture. 72% of our hires at management are from inside our employee ranks. So we're very much a promote from within company. So we offer management training courses, we offer English as a second language course, and we offer them in the workplace. So they don't have to travel or have a lot of effort to be able to go to classes.
Do they do those kind of classes on working hours or on their own hours?
Both.
Both.
So depending, if it's a mandatory training, it's on working hours, but English as a second language is a voluntary program. It's offered early in the morning or after shifts, so that they can come to work early or stay late to be able to go through that type of voluntary training. But we have a number of different leadership development programs. We also have a program for, we call it our junior executive program for high school kids of our, high school age kids of our employees. And in that class, which is on Saturdays, our trainers volunteer to teach that class, But parents bring their kids, we probably have 40 or 50 kids a year who go through a year-long training program, but we help them with college applications, with financial aid applications, with interviewing skills, because we think that, you know, our pipeline for employment starts with getting college or high school age students either prepared to join the workforce or to go to college. Their parents, I think, really appreciate, as Yvanna mentioned, they're very concerned about the pathway that their children would take. They want their kids to have great jobs and great careers, and so they drive their kids in on a Saturday to be able to participate in that type of a program.
You said 72% of your managers are
Promoted from within.
So have you, to do that, to achieve that, have you changed your view of what the academic or educational credential that is required? Is it different for you than it would be elsewhere, you know, elsewhere in the country?
It's, I don't think we've changed our view. It's probably different from what it is elsewhere in the country. So some of our property presidents advanced from frontline positions to senior executive level jobs just by learning on the job, going to internal leadership development programs, or completing their degree while they work for us through tuition assistance or other programs that we have. So the majority of our jobs don't require a degree. We also look at work experience.
Yeah, you know, there's an interesting experiment going underway, I know, in Chicago, where there are a number of the financial industry firms are basically trying to take kids out of high school and put them in jobs that in the past they required a 4-year degree for, and see whether they can train them to do that. Is that sort of what you were talking about with the kids of the parents?
Yes, you know, we'd always encourage everyone to go to college,
Right.
and then our big message, though, is that you're going to college, come back to Las Vegas. Because, you know, all too often kids from Las Vegas, they find jobs other places. We want them to come back to improve the community. But we will also help them develop from high school through our new hire development programs into leadership roles.
Craig, you offer another path here. We had an event in Washington, our Washington Ideas Forum, where the Secretary of Labor, Thomas Perez, recently said that he talked about how college is not the only way to job security or a middle-class income. He talked about the role of apprenticeships as an alternative without the debt, necessarily. Obviously, you folks share that view. I mean, you have a big effort there. What sectors do you find apprenticeships to be the most relevant in, and what kind of students are they the most relevant for?
Apprenticeships traditionally are going to be in the building trades. Apprenticeships that have been around for centuries, if you look at the Eastern European model, that the building trades are the foundation of that. But that's not necessarily where apprenticeship only works. We're seeing a lot more apprenticeship type training happening across the spectrum. We're seeing IT, we're seeing manufacturing, we're seeing all these where they're moving towards that immersion. And what you look at is creating stackable credentials that get you the job, but then building on those stackable credentials to create that educational experience as well. The advantage to the apprenticeship model over the traditional educational model is the immersion in the culture. That you learn the language, you learn the attitudes, you learn all of that goes along with the industry that you're learning. So I could teach somebody how to turn a wrench, but I can't teach them how to speak the language, how to walk the walk, so to speak, that they would learn out on the job site. So creating the culture is what apprenticeship is really good at.
And is this solely, primarily for young people coming out of high school, or is it something that someone can, are you finding people coming to you mid-career?
Average age of the building trade apprentice is right in the mid-40s.
Really?
Yeah.
And usually, have they been working in building trades, and they're trying to advance, or are they coming to it from something else?
Generally, they're coming into it for something else. You see a lot of people that come in that may have an associate's degree or may already have a bachelor's degree, and they're finding that I can make a lot more money as an electrician than I could with my master's degree as a teacher. So the wage a lot of times is what they're looking at when they're switching careers, or just the lack of opportunities, where as an apprentice you have a job as you're learning.
So Brittany, as we have mentioned, alluded to, you are in this fascinating position of working in both worlds of hospitality, tourism, as well as higher education, the intersection of working in the professional class and what you call survival jobs in the New York Times. So when you think about people in the service industry, would you, from your experience, would you say the key to creating more opportunity for them is to provide them with more skills and more credentials, or to make those jobs more rewarding themselves?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I do think that what it means to have a BA is changing right now. And I think when I say a lot of students I don't see are prepared for university, I don't think necessarily university is the best pathway for them, but they've been so indoctrinated that this is the only path to socioeconomic mobility that there's a sort of shame in taking a vocational pathway that there really shouldn't be in a more modern economy, the way that they're changing. But I don't want to ever de-emphasize the value of a college education and the sort of liberal, broad, maybe later in life career skills that can teach. So I think universities need to do a better job of incorporating vocational curriculums. And then I think the workplace can also do a better job of providing, like we're saying, with literacy skills in terms of ESL. A lot of my students are first-generation college students, and they're behind simply because they're bilingual. But that's an intellectual accomplishment people in the professional field don't necessarily accomplish, right? So they are capable, but I think there has to be a sort of more nuanced approach to how we're balancing these things in the workforce and in the university.
You know, this question about whether the key to creating opportunity is to kind of instill people with more training or to create a system that more rewards them for what they are already doing. You have argued that Las Vegas is actually a great place for working women. Talk about why you think that's so, the role of pay equity, unionization. Why do you say that?
Yeah, Nevada has one of the smallest gender wage gaps in the country by state. And I think this is particularly tied to union presence in the state, service industry jobs. I've worked in service industry jobs outside of Nevada, and they are not nearly as good of jobs as they are here, which is why I keep finding myself going back to them. But in a union position, there's a lot of, obviously, the obvious benefits like wage and health insurance, but processes like seniority allow women, the longer they stay in the workforce, to have a little bit more control of their schedule. So as they mature and have children and have more family obligations, they can sort of coordinate more with the workplace and have a little bit more flexibility that in a service job that isn't unionized, sometimes shifts and schedules can be pretty crazy and pretty erratic. So I think that you also have a lot of female-dominated industries like food and beverage and house. And I think that Las Vegas is sort of a great place for women who want to have a working class job that is truly a middle class job. I think a lot of working class jobs are poverty level wages in other states,
right.
But there is an opportunity here to make a career in a lifelong position.
Yvanna, can I ask you the same question? When you think about the adult workforce, and your members, and people who may be beyond your membership as well, is the key to more opportunity for them the kind of training and kind of ascending through the ranks that Michelle was talking about, or is it the kind of the rules of the workplace in terms of hours and wages and benefits? Is that the key to creating more opportunity for more people, or both?
Well, I think that training doesn't necessarily have to lead to vertical mobility. Sometimes it's horizontal, and the amount of training that's offered through partnership that we have with MGM at the Culinary Academy, for example, allows for someone who's been a housekeeper for 50 years to move to being a pantry cook, right? Doesn't necessarily change their status in terms of upward mobility, but does allow them to continue to be in the workforce in a productive way, in a good job. And so I think something that to Las Vegas and that we do really well is capture the opportunities for people to work that what are typically working jobs and have them be middle-class jobs. This is arguably one of the last cities in America where you can come without a college degree and still lead a really solid middle-class, sometimes upper middle-class life without being in a managerial position. And it's something that I think happen in more cities across the country. And so
yeah. So, it's interesting. We've been talking for 25 minutes, and I just realized that we almost entirely been talking about service, gaming, and construction, kind of, and sort of the historical points on the star for the state. So, Steve, let me ask you. I mean, there's obviously been much more discussion in the last few years about diversifying the economy, creating a tech economy, bringing in Tesla, and what else there might be associated with that. Is the state in position? Does the state have the educational and training system Is it producing the pipeline of workers that would make that actually happen, that would make it an attractive place for the kind of industries that people are envisioning relocating here?
So yes and no. Just listening to the panelists here, we don't have much experience together, but we're all singing off the same hymnal. And going forward, the state and the governor have a fairly clear vision about an aligned, at least from the state through, an aligned system for workforce development that includes K-12, includes reintroduction of underemployed adults, et cetera. Probably learn a little bit more about that in a further panel. But designing a system, I think one of the, and just listening to Brittany, one of the casualties of the No Child Left Behind era was, I think, this emphasis on career readiness and knowing or acknowledging vocational ed or career tech ed and sort of carving it off to the side. We see a very clear future where we bring that back in and we provide opportunities for students in high school to engage in authentic learning experiences, not just in an apprenticeship or a traditional CTE as we know it, but bending the curve of CTE towards advanced manufacturing, STEM careers, and incentivizing those pathways for students, whether they go into a stackable, which a year ago I didn't know. I knew stackable was like where I put my Tupperware in, but now I know that the credentials can be stacked. Very thoughtful process for students to enter into to obtain a certificate of value at a community college, then re-enter into the workforce, and then go back and forth and grow their value as they grow their family and move into a livable wage or start in a livable wage career. So we acknowledge, I think, the gap in the issue, our skills gap. We acknowledge the issue, and I think we're beginning to put together the systems and then knit them together in a way that can allow us to make thoughtful considerations.
Don't store the fish in the stackable credentials.
Yeah,
That will not end well. So let me ask you, the package the governor signed last year, was certainly one of the most ambitious in the country in terms of having many different components. What, in your mind, what pieces of that are going to make the biggest difference over the long run?
A good question. So I'll start early and say the focus on early literacy is critical. So full day K, expansion of pre-K, and a real hard stop on accountability for third grade literacy. Knowing, I mean, if you're not reading in third grade, the likelihood of post-secondary attainment are just dramatically diminished. So putting a heavy value on early literacy. I would also say that placing additional investments for students in need, so students with disabilities, gifted and talented students, English learners, as well as students in poverty. We're one of the very few states many states have a poverty weight, additional funds for students who live in poverty beyond the federal push-in. But where we're getting acknowledged in the Victory bill, which acknowledges communities in poverty and their schools that serve those communities, is trying to engage more, and I keep using wraparound services. I think there's a new fancy term for it, but essentially acknowledging that it's going to take the full community to help, and ancillated services to help students learn.
What is the future of SB 302, of the grant program? It was struck down. The finance, as I understand it, the financing mechanism was what was struck down by the court in September, not the underlying program. Will that be the end of it, or will you come forward with a new funding source and try to maintain and continue the program?
Short answer is I don't know. I would doubt that it wouldn't be brought up to try to find a funding source for that in the future at the legislature, but ultimately I don't have the answer to the question.
Any thoughts on the panel about whether that should live or die? Yvanna? The voucher program? Rather, the scholarship program or voucher program, depending on how you call it?
I am prefaces really an education expert. However, I do believe that any movement that shifts money rather than problematic, that suffer the most. So if we're going to see less or are already generate the and should be looked at that lens rather than.
So I want to bring in the audience for questions in a minute, but while we're on while we've gotten to the hot button section of the program, there was a little decision that you all just made here in the state at a very rapid rate to put $750 million of public money into building a football stadium. And as we've been talking about these kinds of issues, if you're going to raise that much tax money, anybody here have a thought on whether that would be the best use for it? Yo, someone's reaching for the microphone.
This was actually my most recent op-ed was about the stadium. I think that the legislative decisions surrounding the stadium is a little bit of why I am a skeptic about how serious Nevada is about solving their public education crisis. I think tourism was obviously an incredibly important part of the state. I am reliant on it for my own income. My students at UNLV, a lot of them have part-time jobs in tourism. But unfortunately, I think the sort of priorities of kind of not necessarily sound economics of what might result from that, I think should have absolutely kept our legislators from making that decision. I think it's embarrassing for Nevada, in all honesty, and I think that if we really are serious about making this state a better place for our young people, a place that they can obtain socioeconomic mobility, not just through traditional routes of college education, but also through task-oriented working class jobs with tourism. I think that we have to say that that was a bad decision.
Steve, just a point of reference, and not to ask you to weigh in on it, but as a point of reference, what was the total price tag of the entire education reform agenda?
Over $1 billion.
About $1 billion?
Yeah.
Okay. So this would be roughly 3/4 of the spending of that. Did you want to weigh in at all, or?
Sure. We were probably one of only labor unions to publicly come out and we created quite a stir with a digital video that some in the room may have seen to really call the question on legislators, and I think it's what sums it up is the session was called as an emergency special session. The idea that as a state we would classify our lack of NFL stadium as an emergency is pretty telling as to where we're at. And I think for us, the discussion was always how can we focus our priorities on what are actually emergency state. And now that it's passed, we're hopeful that it does bring the good jobs that have been talked about and that it does put our brothers in the construction trades back to work and generates a whole new set of revenue. But we'll see.
Taxes falling on you guys.
And I think from the business perspective, I think at MGM we believe whatever is good for business in the state of Nevada and tourism. As the largest taxpayer, we feel the responsibility for supporting a lot of the state's budget, that whatever drives revenue, whichever brings in tourism, the expansion of the convention center, which will bring conventions that currently aren't coming to Las Vegas, will contribute more revenue to both the state's budget and to education.
Of course, the question, though, is not only whether you will generate revenue from this expenditure, but there's an opportunity cost. I mean, you're raising $750 million for this purpose that you will not have for other purposes. In your mind, would there have been other purposes that made more sense?
In my personal mind?
In your personal mind.
I'm the spouse of an educator.
Say no more, as Monty Python would say. Can I ask one last question before turning it over to the audience? Craig, I'm struck, many of you have on your chair a survey that was done by Pearson, our partners, in doing this, and it was interesting that what workers worried about most was not any of the things that are dominating the presidential campaign. They didn't worry about their job being lost to foreign trade. They didn't worry about their job being outsourced. They didn't worry about immigrant coming in and taking their job. What they worried most about was their skills becoming obsolete, in particular because of technological change. I mean, the apprenticeship programs, are kind of a full-on immersion. How right are workers in the workforce already to be worried about being left behind by technological change?
I think it's absolutely a huge concern. As a sheet metal worker of 15 years, the classroom that I entered in as a first-year apprentice is 100% different. But you go into sheet metal and you don't have a background in computers and you're going to be lost. So for a worker that is already in the workforce and is not updating their skills or doesn't have the opportunity to update their skills, there's definitely going to be an issue there.
Yeah. Let's bring in the audience. I think, do we have microphones, or am I just going to call on folks? And I'm going to save a couple minutes at the end because I have a couple final questions I want to ask. So, yes, we do have microphones if anybody wants to ask a question. Yes. Over here. And just please identify yourself.
That voice of a moderate. I'm coming from DC, and I'm wondering, what is your reaction about the have you been embraced because of this election, and because Nevada is considered a state that could go either way, and because the politics? Do you think that people are helping you a little bit more now with the concerns that you've expressed today, as far as education and funding?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I didn't hear the beginning of the
Yeah, we all missed the very beginning. Hold on. Let her bring the mic again, because we all missed the very beginning.
Come up here and I'll give you one of these headsets.
Sharon Bovat, voice of a moderate. I'm mainly from DC, but I'm excited to learn about your situation when you talked about the parents between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m. and about the situation is different for the schools and you're tackling the problems.
Right.
But I was wondering, are the people in DC, are they listening to you more now because we're in such a political year?
So,
are you getting more attention? Thank you.
Steve, she's basically saying because it has become such a battleground state, are the unique problems of the state getting more attention at a national level? Is there anything, for example, in the SSA that is relevant to your challenges?
So we've been getting a lot of national attention. I don't know if it's because of the battleground status, but we got a lot of national attention after the governor's package in 2015. I was just asked to go to DC to talk about the Every Student Succeeds Act regulations, which on its face we entirely agree with, but when you read the regulations themselves, would likely frustrate our ability to execute our agenda on our EL and victory funding. I think for a state that has sometimes not been of national prominence on the education scene, we've been kind of launched into the national prominence. You mentioned the Voucher Program. That was one, of course, but then there are many others that have captured the attention of some national folks.
Do we have anybody else? Yes, over here. There's a mic coming behind you.
My name is Noah, and my question is regarding the stadium funding. Is there some reason why our community couldn't benefit from the advantages of having a stadium in the NFL team, but retain ownership of that facility, much the way, say, Green Bay does, and retain the revenue that would come from owning that facility for educational purposes?
I don't know who best answered that, but maybe Brittany.
That sounds like a nice idea, but my understanding is that we actually do have the liability of ownership, of upkeep, of maintaining the facility, but there's no profit sharing. So that was an adamant part of the deal by investors, that there would be no profit sharing with the city.
In the back, yes.
Hello, this is Victor Wakefield. I'm on the State Board of Education. I recognize a few panelists, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us. I wanted to ask about the worth of a high school diploma in Nevada today. We have a trend line of our graduation rate in the high school level going up, but another trend line going up in terms of college remediation rates, and one of the lowest ACT scores of any state. And so, as somebody on the State Board of Education, and somebody who has just believes deeply in the transformational power of education, I'm curious what we should make of that, how that impacts the workforce, and just any advice that you can give related to that topic.
Interesting question. You see probably thousands, hundreds, or if not thousands of high school graduates every year. What is the diploma worth? What does it tell you?
Well, and I would say that I said earlier that the majority of our jobs don't require a college degree,
Right.
but almost all of our jobs do require either a GED or a high school diploma. So, I mean, there is value for us.
But I think the question was, is there achievement behind it? Is there achievement and skills? You're saying that despite graduation rates going up, ACT scores are low or even going down. What is that? Are you finding that you know, when you hire a high school graduate, does it mean that they have the basic skills that you need? Brittany was saying that in many cases they did not for higher education. Are you finding it in the workplace?
You know, I think it's telling of many things, just discipline, ability to focus, ability to achieve that are important at any in any type of position that we have. So I think it does tell us about a person's ability to achieve a goal.
Yeah. Good, actually, because I didn't want to let everybody, I know we're here mostly to talk about opportunity, but I wanted to ask Brittany one last question. You know, we're here on the day of the presidential debate in the state, kind of an historic moment for the state, which is in the forefront. And you know, from the beginning, the central dividing line in this election, much more than in the past, has been different perceptions among white-collar workers and blue-collar workers. I mean, Donald Trump is as strong as anyone has been among white voters without a college education, and he is struggling as much as any Republican ever has among white voters with a college education. I mean, you have one foot in each of these worlds, and as I've said, you've written very eloquently about the different challenges that they each present. Do you have any thoughts on why there is such a divergent reaction to what he is offering?
I don't understand anything about Donald Trump, so I don't know necessarily how to answer that question, but I think in terms of where we place value in the workforce is something that is a conversation we need to start having. So for example, that piece that you referenced earlier about low skill work, that term, this idea of skills, we often reserve for simply people who are college educated versus vocationally trained or who have spent a long time developing as individuals within the workplace, right? So I think that there's a lot changing right now in how we understand intelligence, how we understand workers' capabilities, their ability to specialize, to progress. I don't know how that relates to the craziness that you're asking me, but I think, I don't know.
You've written something that I thought was very relevant when you said that you talked about kind of the unease you had sometimes when you were clearing a plate at work, and there would be someone from your other life in academia, and you said, "It is a shame I share with many of my blue-collar colleagues a belief that society deems our work inferior."
Yes, and I think that living in Las Vegas has been the process that's challenged my understanding of that. And I think that's why Las Vegas is such a unique and magnificent place, is that you learn that there's people with all sorts of different skills, and that shame is not something that I really should be feeling at all, but it's kind of come from this long, I don't know, I don't want to necessarily call it a class divide, but this feeling of one type of work is more valuable than another. And I think that I hope to challenge my students' understanding of that. I'm living my own understanding of that is constantly being challenged by sort of kind of having a foot in both of these places.
Because I feel like if there's one overriding message I've heard from all of you here today, is that this is a place where there is a belief that just because you don't have a degree doesn't mean you should not be able to achieve a stable middle-class life with reasonable chance of doing better and your kids doing better than you, and that is something that's really important in kind of the identity of this community. Maybe as a final thought, and Michelle as well.
Yep, absolutely. I really believe that Las Vegas should set the standard for service sector work across the country, because it's truly a place where these jobs are not only valued, but they are high-skill jobs here. An example, the cook who makes eggs in any of our coffee shops in town has really hard work. I might not be able to do that, right? But it's an example of the beauty of what happens when you truly invest and place value in what are typically thought of as the lowest level jobs. You give people an opportunity to enter into the middle class and take great pride in their work.
You want to give us maybe a very final thought?
Yeah, and I think going back to the Trump question and the division between college, My personal belief is I think the value of diversity, the diversity in workplace, diversity in education and in our country is an ambiguous topic. To understand.
Not everyone accepts that there's value.
And not everybody understands it. You have to think about it. You have to understand the value of working with people who think differently from you, who come from different backgrounds. And some people just don't get it.
Yeah. You guys have given us a lot to think about here today, and it's really been a pleasure for me. And will you join me in thanking this terrific panel? And I'm going to turn it back to Emily, who's going to take us on to the next